Hey, so, you know how life can just, well, hit you with a ton of challenges sometimes, I mean. We all go through those moments where it feels like nothing makes sense and comfort seems miles away. Well, today we're diving into Paul's letter to the Corinthians, where he shares his own struggles, his hardships, and honestly, some really amazing lessons about how to, you know, suffer well and still find hope. Stick with me, it's going to be encouraging. Okay, so let's set the scene a bit here. Paul's writing this second letter to the Corinthians, probably around 57 or 58 AD, give or take a year. He's writing from Macedonia, which is like the northern part of Greece, and he's sending this to the city of Corinth down south. Now, if you remember from our previous chats or studies, Corinth wasn't just any city, it was a major port city, sitting right on the coast of the Ionian Sea. Back in the 1st century, it had roughly 700,000 people, which is huge for that time. But get this, the majority of that population, like 500,000 people, were slaves. That's more than double the number of free people, which was only about 200,000. So, you can imagine the social dynamic there. Corinth had a reputation, and, well, not exactly a good one. It was known for being a pretty immoral city by the standards of the time, and honestly, it had a lot going on culturally. There were 12 pagan temples scattered around the city, dedicated to all sorts of gods, but the most infamous one was the Temple of Aphrodite, the goddess of love and, sex. And yeah, this temple wasn't just about worship, it actually employed around 1,000 temple prostitutes at any given time, both men and women, which gives you a pretty clear picture of the kind of place it was. Now, back to Paul. He had already written to this church once, in what we call 1 Corinthians. But clearly, some people didn't like what he had to say. There were these false teachers who started spreading rumors, claiming that Paul wasn't a legitimate apostle. They questioned his character, questioned his authority, basically trying to discredit him. And, well, that's kind of what happens when people don't like the message, right? They go after the messenger. So, Paul felt the need to write this second letter, not just to encourage and instruct the believers there, but also to defend himself and his ministry. So, here's the thing, Paul's not just saying, "Hey, I'm right and you're wrong." He's showing why his authority is genuine. He talks about the hardships he's endured, the suffering he's gone through for the sake of the gospel. And, he basically says, if I wasn't called by God, why would I be going through all this? His life literally puts him on the line. And that's part of how he proves he's not just making stuff up. He's lived it, suffered for it, and that gives weight to his message. And when you think about Corinth itself, with all its chaos, its immorality, the sheer size, and the fact that it was a cultural melting pot full of all kinds of pressures, you kind of get why Paul needed to explain himself. He needed to show that his ministry wasn't about personal gain or popularity, it was about the gospel and the people he was called to serve. So, while we dive into this letter, keep in mind this backdrop, a bustling, complicated, sometimes downright wild city, full of people both free and enslaved, surrounded by temples and cultural pressures, and Paul writing from afar, defending his calling while guiding the believers through it all. It's kind of like a front row seat to history, culture, and the reality of ministry all at once. All right, let's really dig into Paul's personal suffering here. Specifically in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 1 through 11. So, Paul starts off by addressing the church in Corinth, and straight away, you can feel the weight of everything he's been carrying. I mean, the guy doesn't sugarcoat it at all. He talks about being burdened beyond measure, almost to the point of despair, even feeling like life itself was slipping away. Now, and here's an important point, Paul isn't being suicidal. He's not saying he wants to die. No. What he's describing is the crushing weight of the hardships he endured for the sake of spreading the gospel. It's real, it's raw, and it's the reality for believers in a fallen world. He talks about having the sentence of death in himself. That sounds intense, right? But again, this is more about the sheer gravity of his trials being opposed, persecuted, misunderstood, and, frankly, just physically and emotionally exhausted. And this is where it gets interesting. Even someone as devoted as Paul, someone who literally walked with Christ and saw miraculous things happen, still experienced despair and extreme stress. That's kind of eye-opening when you think about it, isn't it? It tells us that hardships aren't a sign that you're failing in your faith or that you're doing something wrong. Life is just hard sometimes, and believers are not exempt from that. Paul continues by reflecting on the purpose behind his suffering. He says he has endured all of this so that he wouldn't rely on himself, but on God, the one who raises the dead. That's key. This isn't just suffering for suffering's sake. It's suffering that shapes perspective, that drives dependency on God, that molds character and faith. And here's the thing, Paul didn't ignore the pain. He acknowledged it fully. He doesn't try to make it sound easy or say, "Oh, it's no big deal." He's honest about how overwhelming it was, even beyond his own strength. And I think that honesty is what makes his message so relatable. Sometimes we think faith means we never feel crushed or overwhelmed. But Paul shows us that it's not about avoiding hardship, it's about leaning into God through it. Now, while Paul is very clear about his hardships, he also introduces a fascinating perspective on suffering. He talks about the comfort and consolation that come from God, and how that same comfort is meant to be shared with others. So, even in the midst of his deepest trials, there's this thread of hope and purpose. His suffering isn't meaningless. It's woven into a bigger story, a bigger picture, and that's where the eternal glory versus temporary suffering comes in. He looks at life through this lens where the immediate pain, though intense and real, is temporary. The trials, the burdens, the despair, they're weighty, yes, but they pale in comparison to the eternal joy and glory that await. It's not a way to dismiss or minimize the pain, it's more like a compass pointing toward what really matters. As we read these verses, you can see how Paul models vulnerability and strength at the same time. He's not pretending to have it all together, he's admitting the heaviness, the moments of despair, the things that no one else might see. And yet, in that honesty, there's also resilience. There's trust in God's faithfulness. There's a recognition that even when life feels unbearable, God is present, God comforts, and God will deliver. That's huge, right? Because it reassures anyone watching or listening that feeling overwhelmed doesn't disqualify you from experiencing God's love or from walking in faith. He also makes a point about endurance. Paul talks about being afflicted and comforted in ways that link directly to others. The comfort he receives isn't just for him, it's meant to be shared so that others, who are also suffering, can be uplifted. That's a profound insight. Even in your darkest moments, there's potential to be a channel of God's comfort for someone else, and it works both ways. Seeing others uplifted, seeing God's comfort flow through you, can actually lighten your own burdens. Paul's experience reminds us that community, empathy, and shared struggle are part of the journey through hardship. It's not just a personal struggle, it's interconnected. And let's not skip the realism here. Paul's suffering included fear, perhaps even the very real threat of death, and deep emotional strain. Yet, he keeps his focus on God's provision. He writes about being delivered from a great death, trusting God to continue delivering him. There's a past, present, and future tense in his description, which is fascinating. He says God delivered him, God is delivering him, and God will deliver him. It's this continuous, unwavering reliance that I think we often miss in our own lives. Faith isn't a one-time event, it's a daily choice, a moment-to-moment leaning on God, especially when the burdens feel heavier than what we can bear alone. Paul's perspective also teaches something about the nature of human suffering versus eternal reward. He acknowledges the pain, the distress, the heaviness of the moment, but he contrasts it with the surpassing, eternal glory that awaits believers. It's like saying, yeah, this hurts, but it's not the end of the story. And that perspective is freeing in a way. It doesn't erase the hardship, but it places it in context, in a bigger cosmic framework where the temporary struggles are just that temporary. And in those moments, Paul models how to hold on to hope, how to lean on God, and how to allow suffering to refine rather than destroy you. So, when we really take in verses 1 through 11, it's not just historical text. It's a roadmap for navigating the messiness of life with faith intact. Paul shows that suffering well doesn't mean pretending you're okay. It means acknowledging the pain, leaning on God, finding comfort, and recognizing the greater picture. Life will be hard sometimes, really hard, but Paul's journey reminds us that even in despair, there's a way forward. There's a source of strength that doesn't run out, and there's a hope that's anchored in eternity. It's real, it's raw, and yet it's full of possibility. And that's why his words still resonate today. So, let's talk about how Paul praises God in 2 Corinthians 1:3. Right off the bat, he calls God the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort. And, well, you can hear it in the words. This isn't just some formality or polite expression. Paul really means it. He's acknowledging that God is the ultimate source of comfort, the one who truly sustains us in our darkest moments. I mean, sure, people can comfort us. Friends, family, mentors, they all play a role, right? And that's wonderful. It's really important. But here's the thing. Human comfort is limited. People can only go so far. They have their own limits, their own struggles, their own energy. They can encourage you, pray with you, sit with you. But there's only so much they can give. God, on the other hand, is unlimited. His consolation, His mercy, His tenderness, it never runs out. There's always more. Always. Paul uses words like comfort and consolation repeatedly in this chapter, and it's not by accident. He wants to drive home that God doesn't just patch over our pain. God actually comes alongside us in it, walks with us through it, and even lifts us in ways we might not fully realize in the moment. And the original Greek word he uses, parakaleo, literally means to call alongside, to be a helper, to console. It's the same root word used for the Holy Spirit, the paraclete, in John's Gospel. So, when Paul talks about God comforting us, it's like saying God himself steps in right beside us. He doesn't leave us alone. Isn't that kind of amazing? And there are so many verses that echo this same truth. Psalm 94:19 says, "In the multitude of my anxieties within me, your comforts delight my soul." I love that image, your soul actually delighting in comfort, even amid a storm of anxieties. Or take Isaiah 51:12, where God says, I, even I, am he who comforts you. No middleman, no limits, no conditions, just God. And Isaiah 66:13 has this beautiful, tender imagery as one whom his mother comforts. So will I comfort you. Can you feel that? That sense of closeness, of gentleness, of tender care. And then Psalm 34:18 reminds us that the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. That's powerful. It's not just that God observes our pain, He's near to us in it. He's actively present, actively comforting. So when Paul praises God, he's doing more than just offering a prayer or a blessing. He's pointing to a reality that he's experienced firsthand. He knows what it's like to feel crushed, to feel overwhelmed, to feel the weight of life pressing in. And yet, he also knows what it's like to be lifted out of that heaviness because of God's mercy and comfort. And here's the human thing. Sometimes we think comfort should come from people first, or that it should be quick and easy. But Paul reminds us that true, lasting consolation is something only God can provide. People can help, yes, but God is the source that never empties, never falters, never fails. I love how Paul's approach feels personal and warm, not robotic or formal. He's talking from experience. And I think that makes a huge difference for us today. Life throws all sorts of challenges at us: loss, heartache, disappointment, fear, uncertainty. And while having someone to sit with us, pray with us, or even just listen is so important, it's God's presence that ultimately sustains us. God's comfort isn't just about easing the pain, it's about carrying us through it, teaching us, and even preparing us to share that comfort with others. And, that's what Paul models here. He doesn't just absorb God's comfort for himself, he receives it so he can pour it out to others who are struggling. The God of all comfort is not a passive presence. He's active, he's tender, he's powerful. And the more we lean into that, the more we can endure, the more we can hope, and the more we can even help others along the way. It's like a ripple effect. The comfort we receive from God becomes comfort for someone else. And that's, pretty incredible when you think about it. So as we reflect on this, I want you to imagine God stepping right alongside you in your hardships. Picture him not just watching, but actively comforting, lifting, and sustaining. And maybe, just maybe, in those moments, you can start to see why Paul starts this chapter by praising God so earnestly. It's not just words, it's an invitation for us to experience the same, to find that limitless mercy and consolation in our own lives, and to let that overflow to those around us. That's the kind of comfort that changes everything. All right, now let's dive into something really interesting: Paul's perspective on tribulation. In 2 Corinthians 1:4 and verse 9, he talks about how God comforts us in all our troubles. And here's the key: those troubles aren't just random or meaningless. Paul sees them as teachers. Yeah, teachers. Painful, difficult, frustrating teachers, but teachers nonetheless. And to make this idea more concrete, we can use this ancient Roman analogy he kind of hints at the tribulum. So, a tribulum was this wooden threshing sled with these jagged flint teeth on the bottom. Farmers would drag it over wheat spread on a hard surface, sometimes standing on top of it, sometimes pulled by animals. And the weight plus those jagged teeth would crush the wheat, separate it from the chaff. Brutal, right? But that's exactly what it did. It purified the grain, getting rid of what was useless, leaving behind the valuable wheat. And that's a perfect picture for what tribulation does in our lives. It's painful, it's crushing, it exposes things we probably wouldn't notice in easier times. It separates the chaff, the stuff in our hearts, our habits, our attitudes that aren't good for us from what's actually valuable and enduring. And, sometimes we resist it. We don't like the pressure, the exposure, the discomfort. But if we allow it, tribulation reveals our weaknesses and drives us to something far more important: dependence on God. Paul says, so that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God who raises the dead. He's basically saying, look, when life crushes you, when everything feels beyond your strength, it's a chance to stop relying on yourself and start trusting in God. And that's tough, right? Because our instinct is to try to fix things, to control the outcome. But tribulation pushes us out of that comfort zone and makes us lean hard into God. Now, think about this. How often do we only realize we're weak when we're under pressure? That's what Paul is talking about. These trials, these hardships, they pull the layers back. They show us the stuff we don't like about ourselves, the stuff we'd probably rather ignore. And in that sense, tribulation isn't just punishment or random suffering. It's God's tool to refine us. It's like spiritual gym time, only way more intense and, let's be honest, way more painful. And here's the thing: if we let it, it teaches us lessons we wouldn't learn otherwise. Lessons about humility, about patience, about perseverance, about God's faithfulness, about our own reliance on Him instead of ourselves. And let's pause for a second. This isn't easy. Tribulation hurts, it crushes, it exposes us. But there's a purpose. Paul really wants us to see that it's not just suffering for suffering's sake. It's a way to grow, a way to purify, a way to strengthen faith and character. And honestly, if we look closely, we'll see that those moments when we feel like we're about to break are sometimes the exact moments when God's power is made most real in our lives. And that's what Paul experienced, and that's why he's talking about it with such conviction. And here's another thing Paul encourages us to be asking God while we're in these moments. Like, Lord, what are you trying to teach me through this? That's huge, because it shifts our mindset from just wanting the suffering to end to actually looking for the lesson, looking for the growth. And often, what comes out in that process is not just reliance on God, but awareness of the chaff in our own hearts. We might notice selfishness, impatience, pride, or fear that we didn't see when life was easy. Tribulation reveals, and revelation is the first step toward transformation. So, when Paul calls tribulation a teacher, he's pointing us to this dual effect. It exposes the junk, and it draws us to God. And you know what's interesting? The more we experience that kind of divine comfort in the midst of hardship, the more equipped we are to comfort others later. Paul talks about receiving comfort so that he can then comfort others who are suffering. So tribulation isn't just for us, it's part of a bigger story. It teaches us, it refines us, it drives us to God, and then it allows us to be a source of encouragement and support to others. And honestly, when we really get this, it changes how we view hardships. We start to see them not just as annoyances or unfair blows, but as opportunities. Opportunities to be purified, to grow, to trust God, and to prepare us to help others. And yeah, it's painful. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but it's also purposeful. Tribulation, in Paul's eyes, is a wise, albeit tough, teacher that we all need at one time or another. And if we can embrace that perspective, well, it shifts the way we experience life's challenges and allows us to see God's hand in even the hard, crushing moments. Okay, now let's talk about something really powerful that Paul models in 2 Corinthians 1, 4-7, how he turns his own suffering into an opportunity to help others. And honestly, this is kind of counterintuitive at first, right? When you're going through pain, your instinct is usually to focus on yourself, to protect yourself, maybe even to wallow a little. But Paul flips that on its head. He talks about receiving God's comfort in his tribulation so that he can then comfort others who are going through similar struggles. It's like, the more we allow God to support us in our pain, the more we're able to extend that support to someone else. And here's the thing: that process actually lifts our own spirits. 2. When we step out of our own headspace and start caring for others, it can really shift perspective and lighten our emotional load. I remember personally a time when I was going through a rough patch, feeling pretty low, and I thought, no one else has it as bad as I do. And then a friend reached out. They had just gone through a tragedy in their own family, and they wanted to talk, and something about focusing on them, listening, praying for them, even just being present, completely changed my mood. It didn't make their pain disappear, of course, but it reminded me that I wasn't alone in struggle and that my own troubles weren't the whole story. And that's exactly what Paul is getting at. By helping others, we step out of the tunnel vision of our own suffering, and we realize that God's comfort is big enough to go around. Paul phrases it beautifully: "For as the sufferings of Christ abound in us, so our consolation also abounds through Christ." It's like saying, the more we experience Christ's suffering and, importantly, his comfort, the more we can channel that comfort to others. He even says if we are afflicted, it's for their consolation and salvation. And if we are comforted, it's for their consolation and salvation. The comfort isn't just for us, it has a ripple effect. And isn't that such a different way of thinking about hardship? Instead of just getting through our own difficulties, we can let them become tools to lift others up. It's a mindset shift. Pain doesn't just isolate us, it can connect us. And, I think this is one of those lessons that can be hard to put into practice, because when life is heavy, your brain just defaults to me, get through this. But Paul shows that if we intentionally think about others, like if we ask God how he wants us to be a comfort to someone, it can transform the experience. There's this amazing psychological effect too. When we're others focused, our own suffering doesn't feel quite as suffocating. It gives our hearts a little breathing room. And the impact isn't only spiritual, it's relational. We build connections. We create hope for someone else. And somehow, through that, our own hope is strengthened. I remember my dad modeled this in his own life, actually, in his later years. He was dealing with congestive heart failure, and the physical strain was significant. Yet, he would still call people, check in, pray, encourage. He had very real limitations, but his focus on others never wavered. And it was so uplifting, honestly, to see how his concern for others lifted his own spirits. It's exactly what Paul describes here. When we step out of ourselves and show empathy and care for others, we often find that our own burdens feel a little lighter. Not because the pain disappears, but because we're no longer carrying it alone. There's a shared experience, a shared comfort. So, in practical terms, what does this look like? It could be a small thing, right? Sending a text to someone who's struggling, praying for a friend, offering encouragement, or even just listening. The key is that Paul is modeling a shift from self-absorption to outward focus, and it works. It helps others, yes, but it also keeps our own hearts from being trapped in the mire of self-pity or despair. The act of giving comfort, of pouring out the consolation we've received from God, makes the suffering meaningful. It gives it purpose beyond our own immediate circumstances. And this is why Paul emphasizes the reciprocity of suffering and comfort. The trials he faces are not meaningless. They become a platform for ministry and service. And here's the subtle brilliance. It's not about ignoring our own pain. Paul isn't saying, oh, just forget about your suffering and help others. He's saying, accept the comfort God gives you, even amid hardship, and then allow that comfort to flow outward. It's a dynamic, living process, one that strengthens both the giver and the receiver. And when we practice that, we start to see our struggles as part of a larger, connected story, one where God's comfort is active and expanding, touching multiple lives, including our own. All right, let's dive into this part of 2 Corinthians 1:9-10 and talk about how Paul leans on God's faithfulness. Paul doesn't just rely on God in one moment. He points to the past, the present, and the future. He says God delivered him from a great death. God does deliver him now, and God will deliver him in the days ahead. Past, present, future. It's like a full circle trust. And honestly, it's kind of comforting to see. Faith isn't a one and done thing. It's a constant choice. A daily leaning into God even when life feels heavy or unpredictable. And here's the thing, this isn't just some abstract principle for Paul. He's talking from experience, from the trenches, from real struggles that were overwhelming and even life-threatening at times. When he says God has delivered him, he's remembering how God has shown up before. That builds trust. And then he's in the present, acknowledging that God is actively sustaining him now, even in the middle of difficulties. And looking forward, he trusts God will continue to provide deliverance, even when the future is uncertain. That kind of faith isn't theoretical, it's practical and transformative. I love how this connects with the old hymn, God Will Take Care of You, written by Sevilla Martin back in 1904. The verses go something like this. Be not dismayed, whate'er betide, God will take care of you. Beneath his wings of love abide. God will take care of you. Think about that imagery for a second, God's wings, surrounding you, holding you close, protecting you. And the hymn continues, no matter what may be the test, God will take care of you. Lean, weary one upon his breast. God will take care of you. Isn't that just beautiful? It mirrors exactly what Paul is writing. God's care isn't limited by time or circumstance. It spans our past, comforts us in the present, and gives hope for the future. Paul's use of past, present, and future tenses is really interesting too. It shows that trust in God isn't static. It's not just a quick prayer and done. It's acknowledging his past faithfulness, leaning on him now, and resting in the promise of his continued care. That's a framework we can use today. When life feels overwhelming, remembering what God has already done can give strength. Leaning on him in the present provides peace. And trusting him for the future removes the fear of the unknown. It's a full spectrum of trust. And it's so practical when you think about it. And here's what's really encouraging. Paul didn't have everything figured out. He had real fears, real threats, and yet he kept returning to God. That's freeing for us too, because we don't have to have perfect faith or total control. We just need to keep turning to God, moment by moment. Life is messy, right? Unpredictable, challenging, sometimes downright heavy, but God's faithfulness is steady, unwavering, and unlimited. He doesn't run out of mercy or care. And that's the message Paul is passing along. I think what Paul models here is a trust that anchors us, no matter what comes our way. He's experienced deliverance. He's experiencing God's help in the present, and he's confident about the future. And when we connect that with hymns like "God Will Take Care of You," it's not just nostalgic or poetic, it's a reminder that the same faithful God is still with us today. His care, his protection, his comfort is real, ongoing, and accessible. So, when you feel anxious about past failures, current struggles, or the uncertainty ahead, remember Paul's example. Trust God's faithfulness, lean into his care, and let his history of deliverance give you confidence now. And know this, he is consistent, and his care is personal. Just like the hymn says, beneath his wings of love, we can find rest. Lean on him, rely on him, and let him carry you through the trials of today, the weight of yesterday, and the unknown of tomorrow. God's faithfulness spans it all, and Paul's life is a beautiful reminder of that. All right, let's talk about something really beautiful in 2 Corinthians 1:11, how Paul invites others to pray for him. He calls it a gift, actually. The prayers of others. And that's kind of amazing when you think about it. Paul, this giant of faith, this leader, doesn't try to go it alone. He openly asks for help, for prayer, knowing that intercessory prayer, the prayers offered by others on your behalf, is powerful. And here's the thing we sometimes forget: asking for prayer isn't a burden. It's actually an invitation for connection. It's saying, I trust you to stand with me, even from afar. Think about it when we ask for prayer. We're not imposing. True friends, family, or a supportive community don't see it as a nuisance. They see it as a way to love and support. And Paul knew that. He welcomed the prayers of the church in Corinth. He understood that his ministry, his endurance through hardships, wasn't just sustained by God alone, it was strengthened through the prayers of others. That's why he calls their prayers a gift. It's tangible support that uplifts, sustains, and connects us, even when we can't see the results right away. And here's something else that's so encouraging: prayer connects us in our struggles. When someone prays for you, there's a sense of solidarity, a reminder that you're not facing your trials in isolation. It's like having an army of hearts lifting you up, backing you up, even when the weight of life feels crushing. And Paul models this for us. He's transparent about his own hardships, and he invites others into that vulnerability through prayer. That's powerful because it reminds us that faith isn't meant to be lived in isolation. Community matters. Shared prayer matters. It strengthens both the one praying and the one being prayed for. And, honestly, this can be practical for us today. If you're struggling, asking for prayer can feel awkward or even selfish. But it's actually a courageous act of trust. It's saying, I can't do this alone, but I believe God can work through you to support me. And sometimes, offering to pray for someone else lifts your own spirit too. Paul knew that dynamic comfort flows from God, but it also flows through us to others. So intercessory prayer isn't just about asking, it's about creating a network of spiritual support. a tangible way of walking alongside one another in life's trials. So as we reflect on this verse, maybe take a moment to think about the people around you. Who could you pray for, and who might pray for you if you simply asked? Paul's example encourages us to embrace both sides of that, to humbly request help and to generously offer it. Intercessory prayer isn't a burden, it's a beautiful connection, a gift, and a powerful reminder that none of us are meant to face life's hardships alone. So, as we wrap up, remember the big takeaway here: suffering well isn't about avoiding pain, it's about leaning on God, learning from trials, turning our focus to help others, and letting prayer connect and strengthen us. Life's hardships are real, but God's comfort, faithfulness, and the support of others can carry us through. If you found this helpful or encouraging, go ahead and like this video. Maybe even subscribe for more discussions like this. Let's keep growing together, one step at a time.